Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. This is a very special webinar. Not only is the subject special, but so is our presenter. Professor George, you have to help me with this, I'm sorry, Rzewski, and Andy will correct me about this later, is a very special presenter. We'll hear more about him in just a moment. But first of all, let me just tell you, my name is Dalim Basu. I'm chair of BCS North London branch and Central London branch as well. But this is a very auspicious occasion because this is a collaboration between those two groups, North and Central London, and BCS IRMA, the Information Risk Management Association, which is a very eminent specialist group of the BCS, the British Computer Society. So I know we've got people here from BCS, various groups in BCS, and also a few from ISACA. I would just like to say welcome to everybody. I also know that we have people who are mostly located in London, but also there will be many others from outside London as well, and possibly even some from outside the UK. Welcome to you all. I hope that you are safe and well, and so are your people around you. This, of course, is a special seminar, a special webinar for another reason, because in these sad times, our topic today is a very special one. It's coronavirus risk modeling and complexity science. Now, what's the link between those? And also, what can you tell us about George? There's somebody here who knows George much better than I do. He's one of my very eminent and long-standing BCS IRMA colleagues. He is Andy Motari, who is the vice chair of BCS IRMA. Andy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and especially about George?
Yes, certainly. Welcome everybody to this webinar. I was a student of Professor George Rzewski going back to 1973 when I was doing a part-time MSc course at Kingston Polytechnic, now Kingston University. And I know that the subject that George is now going to present today, the idea started a long time ago when we all had mainframe computers all over the place in private and public industry. Now we can see how things have changed ever since. Now, you are aware that currently in industry, we log and track risks. But imagine you have got a project with hundreds or thousands of risks. And for a minute, imagine that all these risks are going to start simultaneously together. What are you going to do? Now, George is going to touch on complexity science, the science of groups, where I'm sure that in future we will be using much of that. So over to you, George.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Dalim. I hope audience hears me. If you do, you are most welcome to this webinar. I'm delighted to talk to you. I'm sorry I can't see you, but here we are. Under circumstances, we shall do the best. So, coronavirus risk modeling and complexity science. That's the topic. Let's look at my first slide. Which doesn't actually move. Ah, that's a good beginning.
Hello, George.
Yes,
click on the slide and then press one of your arrow buttons on your keyboard. That should move it along.
Yeah. This is what is not happening. Ah, maybe now. That's it.
That's it.
Right. So you see this slide. This is the first one, and it is hypothesis of this presentation. And it says current models of spreading infection are inadequate because they attempt to predict a complex group behavior, such as epidemic, ignoring principles of complexity science, which is the science of complex group behavior. Now, what are the inadequacies as I see them? First of all, different models provide radically different results. How is it possible that Oxford University model gives us twice as larger infection rate, half of the infection rate of the Imperial College model? The second inadequacy is that only average infection rate is calculated. Now, we know very well that infection rate is not the same in a densely populated room and outside. Then, of course, no virus adaptation and mutation are covered. Group behavior of viruses and potential victims is ignored. And above all, the effectiveness and cost of protection policies are not predicted. So the question which I like to ask, did you know that viruses live and attack in groups? Every living creature lives in a group. So it's not surprising that viruses also live in groups. And there is an incredibly interesting article in Nature which describes how viruses talk to each other. Listen to this. The viruses were chattering away, passing notes to each other in a molecular language only they could understand. They were deciding together when to lie low in the host cell and when to replicate and burst out in search of new victims. And this kind of social aspect of viruses was discovered quite recently, 2018, by Israeli scientists led by Sorek. Now let's look what is then complexity science. It is science that studies behavior of complex groups. A group, or more formally a system, is called complex if it is open, which means interacts with other groups, if it consists of a large number of diverse members, if members are engaged in intensive interaction, exchanging messages, or passing infection. If members have autonomy, that means they are not centrally controlled. They have certain freedom of behavior. So down at the bottom of the slides, we have some examples of very complex systems. Human brain is the most complex system that we know of. Huge numbers of members of that group of neurons, 100 billion neurons potentially interconnected in a neural network. Then we have a completely new development, and that is the Internet of Things, which is a place where 50 billion various devices are communicating with each other, bypassing people. So my door will send via internet information to my alarm that it was unauthorized entry into my house. That is just a simple example of the Internet of Things. When you think of an epidemic or pandemic, it's the whole population of this planet, which amounts to 7.8 billion, are potential victims. So they are part of this complex group called pandemic. What is affecting us all who are connected to business or work in business is that more than 62% of all the people who live on this planet are connected to the internet, and about 2 billion simultaneously are trying to reach a certain commercial transaction matching or modify or cancel. And this includes suppliers of services and products, consumers, investors, bankers, consultants, accountants. Can you imagine 2 billion people at the same time accessing a marketplace? Now, that is complexity. Now, what is fascinating that all living creatures, as I already said, organize themselves in clusters, cells, herds, flocks, swarms, gangs, communities, families. So you see on this slide a diagram showing a complex group as a network with clusters in which you have very intense communication between members of the group, with very few communication lines between clusters. Now, why would all living creatures organize themselves in clusters? Have you ever thought of that? Why do we have all these herds, flocks, swarms, gangs, communities? Well, it is to facilitate the acquisition, storage, and distribution of resources required for life. To live alone is not only lonely, but it is very inefficient in terms of actually getting resources that you need for life. So a group of appropriate size is always formed by animals, by microorganisms, by people. And main activity, therefore, in every organization or every group is the allocation of available resources to demands. You have to think in these terms. For example, in business, it is you allocate people to duties, robots to tasks, money to projects, or knowledge extracted from data to problems. It is allocation of resources to demands. In a family, of course, food, clothing, accommodation, money, but even more importantly, in a family, the allocation of attention to a member of the family. It's still the allocation of resource for life. In epidemic, we can say in a very strange, maybe way, that what we have allocation of human cells to viruses. From the point of view of a virus, human cell is resource for life. Now, complex groups have very interesting properties, like self-organization. They are not controlled centrally. They can self-organize themselves to adapt to unexpected disruption, say, like giraffe. No food, low, well, let's grow a long neck. Resilience to fraud and attacks, like guerrilla warfare. Do you know that since Napoleonic times, no nation that started a war managed to win that war? Basically, in most cases, attacked nation organize itself into guerrilla warfare, and the conflict goes on and on and on, and after a while, aggressor just goes home. Now, that is resilience, which is only given as a property to complex groups, complex systems. There are many interesting properties of complex system: sustainability, intelligence, creativity, and so on. I don't think we have time to go through all of them, but perhaps emergent properties are worth looking at. In a human brain, there is no neuron which is responsible for human intelligence. Human intelligence is an emergent property. It emerges from interaction of neurons. Creativity, propensity for self-improvement, these are all properties that emerge from the interaction of large number of members of the group, or you could say of components of a system. Let's mention butterfly effect. Because of nonlinearity, which is always present in complex systems, we use a very beautiful, if you like, metaphor for a phenomenon that a little, almost insignificant disruption at the end of the planet can be accelerated into a real storm at the other end of the planet. And that's what we call butterfly effect. Moving a butterfly wing will cause that. Now, just consider how this virus pandemic occurred. One person eats infected animal, or maybe one scientist in a laboratory where viruses are produced, developed, makes a mistake. And in no time, all 7.8 billion people are potentially affected. a real butterfly effect. A small action causes enormous consequences. Maybe we should stop at this. Now, on this side, you can see how complex groups differ from centrally controlled groups, like dictatorship, big corporation, a big bureaucracy, mass production factory, or man-made system like jet engine, bridges. Such centrally controlled organizations are always organized in hierarchies, which is shown in the right-hand side corner of the slide. And the key properties are predictable behavior under stable conditions, rigidity, resistance to change, and really inability to adapt to sudden disruptions. While look at the examples of complex groups, global warming, mass immigration, terrorist organizations, epidemics, wars, internet-based global market, democratic nations, communities, social groups, care homes, families, and natural ecosystems, a forest, a river, a swarm of bees. Now, hugely important part of our lives, completely neglected until recently. Only in the late 90s, the science which is studying behavior of these complex systems emerged. Key properties are collective intelligence. Wouldn't it be nice to have in a corporation a collective intelligence which is greater than the sum of intelligences of members? Self-organization. Why do we have to reorganize a corporation? Why should not self-organize whenever a disruption occurs? And now I come to something which is really a central part of this webinar, and that is digital eco simulator. I have designed this simulator while sitting in isolation at home. It's not coded, so there is no proof of concept, but specification which I developed was that it should calculate infection rates in a variety of contexts: open spaces, gardens, streets, beaches, closed spaces, homes, theaters, cinemas, restaurants, pubs, hospitals, care homes, and should also answer questions: how much and at what cost infection rate would be reduced by various protection policies, lockdown, social distancing, face mask, testing, whatever you invent. Now that is so much more comprehensive than current models can offer, purely because it is based on the idea that pandemic is a complex system. Now that simulator consists of two parts. In one part is a simulated world. In other words, I invent that UK consists of only care homes. And these care homes are connected because we know that the people who are servicing this, they go from one home to another. So the situation in the real world, as close as possible, is a network of clusters in which every cluster is one home and they are interconnected. So I can then design a digital model which reflects this simulated model. In fact, in this digital model, for answering that particular question about what is going on in care homes are only care homes, no other parts of the nation. The key to this simulator is a knowledge base. In this knowledge base must be collected all the knowledge we have about infection rates, about in various contexts, and not only effectiveness of protection policies, but also the costs of protection. So I can, if I get any grant or investment, design the shell for the simulator, but to design the knowledge base to actually collect and store knowledge about epidemic, there is a need for cooperation of very large number of experts of the kind that I've just mentioned. This is, in fact, not difficult to design if you understand principles of complexity science. And yet, we didn't have anything like that. And decisions how to protect ourselves were made without knowledge which could have been obtained by having digital. Why is complexity science ignored? Well, the answer is very simple. It's a new science. Well-established scientists are never looking left and right what is going on. They are really overloaded just doing better and better work in the subject area they are specializing. So here we are. An American philosopher of science, Kuhn, described switches of one paradigm to another as revolution in science. It is always resented by those who made a name in a paradigm that is valid, is giving good results, but suddenly real world is changing. Something new problems appear, and the old paradigm is not able to solve new problem. So then you have number of competing paradigms which were resented by those which are experts in old paradigms, of course. And after a while, paradigm switch occurs. Now, it is still possible, I think, for me to just tell you something more besides what was the intention, and that is to present to you this simulator. And that is what the concept of digital ecosystems. There is the whole movement to transform current corporations into adaptive systems, complex adaptive systems. So businesses, administrations, and even political parties that have collective intelligence can self-organize and can co-evolve and be sustainable. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, we have developed technology for doing that, for transforming businesses, administrations, and political organizations from centrally controlled to self-organizing and co-evolving. And the diagram on this page, which is very similar to the simulator, represents that transformation, where what is happening in real world is copied in digital world, and digital world collects information on current state of the real world, disruptive events that occur in the real world, forecasts which are available, and calculates the future state, the optimal future state, and sends this information across to the real world. Now, if you want to know more about complexity science, here is a list of books and papers. I'm working in this area for at least 20 years, and my work is very experimental. I design complex adaptive system for commercial purpose. If I can get a customer, and when this system begins to work, to self-organize, to adapt in reality, I observe and collect information which improves my design method for the next system, but also contributes to concepts and principles of complexity science. So, if you are still there, well, please ask questions or make comments. Or, if you prefer, write to me. Here is my email address. Thank you.